podcast is Christian. This podcast is reformed. This podcast is post-millennial, optimistic, and reconstructionist. And this podcast is for fun. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Reconciled Radio, episode 8. I'm here with my buddies in our secret underground. Actually, we're not underground this week, but we are in a secret bunker in northern Michigan. I'm here with my friends Jacob and Jesse. You guys say hello.
What's up, man?
How's it going?
Doing well, and we also have just a really, really special boy here with us as well.
How special is he?
And his name is Jose, and he is straight out of Los Angeles, California, the 213.
Straight out of Compton?
No? What area code? 562, what? Joey's the latest installment of our great Calpina Exodus of 2018-2019. He is the third family to move here to northern Michigan from Southern California, joining us here. And we're gonna put him on the spot today. He doesn't know what we have in store for him yet. Actually, we don't have anything. We're not going to pull his beard or anything.
No, that's reserved for Jacob. We can only pull his beard.
Come on now.
But we do have a cool show lined up. We hope that it'll be edifying and entertaining for you. We are going to kind of engage with Andrew Yang, the 2020 presidential candidate from one of the candidates from the Democratic Party. And he's been doing all the rounds on all the podcasts. He was on Joe Rogan. We're going to play a clip from that. I just listened to his full or I think most of it. Most of his interview on Ben Shapiro. And what can we say about Andrew Yang, boys?
Interesting, to say the least.
He's a socialist.
Definitely that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Let's not beat around the bush. He's a socialist, but he's just the sweetest little socialist you ever did meet. And he dresses it up nicely, but at the end of the day, he's in conflict with much of God's law, much of biblical ethic. And so later on in the show, we will get into that and hopefully just gauge everything that or a lot of what he said with a biblical worldview.
Yeah, definitely. Hey,
Jesse, you and I both read A Christian Manifesto lately. What was your thoughts on that book?
Christian Manifesto?
Yeah.
Francis Schaeffer?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I think he really did a good job at explaining humanism kind of throughout the ages, kind of, he's got other series where he does like a more in-depth historical look at like the progression of humanism and stuff like that. But I just think he made a really good point, and I love that it was called A Christian Manifesto, because it should be. I mean, we should look at that and really see that God does have stuff for us to be doing and to be active in and to be watching out for.
Wasn't there, I know there's a communist manifesto that Karl Marx wrote, but he also, there was the other one called a secular manifesto, 1933? Humanist Manifesto.
Yep, the Humanist Manifesto.
So I thought it was cool that he called it that, because he was just being blatant about the fact that it was a Christian manifesto. This is how we think about life. This is how we think about ethics. This is how we think about the economy. Yep. It was excellent. I thought that when I got done reading it was a book that every Christian should have on their shelf and have read it once, at least.
At least have read it once.
You know what, after I read that book and I watched some of the old film documentary stuff that he did with his son Frankie.
How Should We Then Live?
How Should We Then... Yeah. What's it called?
How Should We Then Live?
How Shall We Did Live. I started digging into his son, Frankie Schaeffer. Have you guys looked into this dude at all?
He kind of went off.
Not kinda. He found the biggest cliff, and he put a brick on the throttle pedal, dude.
He went off the rails a little bit. And, a lot of people, I think, in Reconstructionist circles and in other circles as well, kind of have mixed feelings on Francis Schaeffer. And there's certain regards where it's like, okay, I can understand certain aspects. But ultimately... his work that he did, I think, was very beneficial to the Christian community. I believe he wrote very similar to like C.S. Lewis, and a lot of people rail against C.S. Lewis at times about different things like that. But I think he did such a good job at showing our duties in a Christian life and how we should actually be, actually engaging these kind of things and these kind of topics. But yeah, it's such a sad thing to see that Frankie Schaeffer just railed so much against him and kind of went far off, from what, and it's like that's just a sad testimony to a legacy that, should be honored by, those who.
Yeah, because he didn't just go he didn't just kind of gently back out of Christianity.
No.
He went the complete far left. He's a total humanist, secularist, leftist.
It's like everything that they always talked about and they worked against. He was just like, oh, now I'm going to follow that.
Yeah, and I can't remember the name of the book. What was it? Crazy. I think it was Crazy for God,
Crazy
where he wrote
for
about
God.
his parents. He just slandered their name, man. It was super sad.
Both his father and mother, and it was like all the work that he did. I mean, on Francis Schaeffer's writings aside, like a lot of the work that he did in Switzerland and stuff like that, and having the I can't even think of what it's called now. That foundation that he had out there, it was very beneficial to a lot of different people, and all types of Christians got a lot out of that, and really kind of flourished their Christianity even more. And it's like, and all of a sudden, you have Frankie Schaeffer that's just smearing their names.
You know what else I thought? Like you said, he kind of meets a mixed review. And you know what? Let's just say this. Every single Christian author meets a mixed review, even in Christendom. I mean, you can't find one that everybody loves. But what's interesting about him, and I don't know all the history. I'm not an expert on Schaeffer or any of the other guys for that matter. But having read some Rushdoony and some Bonson and some North and some DeMar and all the guys, he uses the exact same language. I mean, he does. At least early on, he was in it.
And that's why a lot of people, especially in Reconstructionist circles, don't like him, because it's like you basically copyrighted. A lot of them will say that he copyrighted. And
really?
That he pretty much just took everything that he's saying, never gave credit to any of that. But it's like, but if we're all trying to get to the same thing and saying the same thing, like, I'm not that... I don't have that big problem with it. Like, if you blatantly copyrighted, it's like, okay, there's some issues right there. But it doesn't seem to be. After reading a lot of his stuff, and I've also read some of his other books, or I should say listened to him, audiobook format. But he's got a couple of them. Francis Schaeffer does. The God Who Is There. He Is There and He Is Not Silent. He had a couple of those books that's very apologetic and very, rails against humanism as far as their belief that God isn't there and all that kind of stuff. So he's very... very good at that, and his language that he spoke was very presuppositional at times. It was very theonomic at times, and so a lot of people would be like, "Oh, you just copied, and you're not giving credit to it." And I was even reading an article where they were talking about a Christian manifesto, and in that book, how you show how the humanist is wrong, and you give things that we should be doing, and at times, going against the government, and actually, like a tyrannical government, I should say, and I can't think of the term that he used, but basically to go against it and protest against it and things like that. But a lot of them are like, oh, you never really give a good response, and I think that's where Reconstructionists, where the response that we should be giving, or the way forward, should be God's law.
That was the charge against Van Til, because when Van Til was writing his books, basically he helped us to deconstruct all that humanist thinking and come at it from a presuppositional worldview. But and I really don't see it as a mark or a demerit on any of those guys, because what happens is everybody builds on the generation before them. And so after Van Til kind of deconstructed everything, Rushdoony came along and started to reconstruct, no pun intended, and the rest of the guys started and Bonson, of course, too. Bonson being a huge scholar in Van Til theology and presuppositional thought. So I don't know. I just want to say, if anybody copyrights good stuff, good job. Thanks for that good copywriting.
Good job.
Yeah, and also, we're all copyrights of the original author at the end of the day.
Ooh, yeah.
Oh, you like that?
Yeah, I like that.
What are you guys reading this week? What do you got going on?
Me?
You been reading anything? Or are you just working your bones to the bone?
Working my butt off 50-plus hours a week. It's extensive. But, no, I've actually been getting more into audiobooks. And I actually just recently... and we probably will mention him a little bit here, but I actually just read Ben Shapiro's latest book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, The Right Side of History.
How was it?
It was pretty good. I mean, because, as much disagreements as I have with him, I mean, I agree a lot with what he says, especially when he talks about political schemes and the political landscape of the culture. I definitely agree in a lot of instances, but, of course, him being a Orthodox Jew, I disagree with that, and I disagree with his position on Jesus and things like that. He actually was on Joe Rogan not long ago, and he referenced, Jesus is basically, he was just this Jewish rebel who, rebelled against the Roman Empire and got killed for it. Like, that was basically his view of Jesus. But what was nice is, I've talked to atheists before that are like, oh, Jesus never existed. At least a true honest Orthodox Jew will say, well, yeah, he existed, but I just don't believe he's the Messiah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Have you heard Shapiro interact with Old Testament law at all? And what's his view on how it applies to modern day politics?
I'm not going to speak for him. I don't know exactly, what his view would be, but I've listened to him doing on his show, on his podcast before, where he goes into like Old Testament stuff. Like he's talked about the Psalms, he's talked about different things like that. And I think the biggest thing would just be for his, in his Jewish community, and in him personally, that it would be the right kind of way to live as far as that go.
But he doesn't want to impose
it. I don't
it?
know. Yeah, I don't think he would view that the use of it in government is in the truest sense.
Okay.
That should be the case.
Okay.
But his book, anyway, what I was talking about,
Yeah,
The Right Side of
sorry.
History, it was actually, to me, very similar to like what Francis Schaeffer did. And he just did like an outline of history almost, and just showed like the how wrong the progressive leftist type views are throughout history, and then showed how humanism, he even spoke a little bit onto that. And but it was ultimately, it was a really good historical kind of showing. I really enjoyed it.
I was just looking to see if I could find it. Matt Walsh went on a little tear this week. Did you hear
we're
about this?
We're going to talk about this?
Just for a second, I
don't
guess,
mind,
because it
but-
just came up. I just
Yeah.
remembered that, and Saiton Bruggencay has been just killing it,
Yeah.
as he do.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because
so-
it was a very interesting comment that he
Yeah.
made.
So here's the string of tweets that kind of got him into some hot water with Christians anyway. The first one was, on the Sunday special with Ben Shapiro, I made the point that Christians should not cite the Bible when arguing about cultural issues with people who don't believe in the Bible. I've sustained a fair amount of criticism for this point, which I thought was rather obvious. Then he goes on, in order to persuade someone, you have to connect with them on a level they understand and use arguments they find convincing. If you appeal to an authority that they do not think is an authority, your argument will succeed in making you look pious, but it will fail to persuade. In order to cite the Bible, you must first establish it as an authority, which is a completely different argument and not one that needs to be injected into a discussion of into a discussion of abortion, immigration, transgenderism, etc. If you insist on quoting the Bible in an argument with non-believers, you are essentially deciding that every argument must be a theological argument. You're exactly right. That is what we're doing. Every
So,
argument
wait.
is a theological argument.
So he's saying that not every issue is a gospel issue?
That's what he's saying. He says,
That doesn't seem right.
You've sworn off logic, reason, and science as authorities altogether. This, again, may make you look pious, but you will never persuade anyone of anything ever, period. And you also make Christianity look like an utterly irrational religion filled with people who cannot grasp any concept or make any case or any point without quoting Bible verses.
Very
I think
strong,
that's it.
very strong
Wow.
language in there.
Thoughts?
And that was
can-
Matt
Pe-
Walsh.
Penny for your thoughts? Yeah, that's Matt Walsh,
Yeah,
who's a
Matt
Catholic.
He's a Catholic.
Okay, yeah, right.
There's another one. Matt Walsh is. I have listened to his podcast. I do think he gets a lot of things right.
Like Shapiro.
Yeah, that when it comes to the political landscape and going against leftist views, going against all that kind of stuff. But when he starts talking about religious stuff, it's kind of I'm not going to say kind of. It's kind of cringeworthy.
Yeah.
It's very cringeworthy. I was
So-
just going to say I'm not going to say kind of. It's
Well,
cringeworthy.
yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Well, that string of tweets, was that approved by the Pope? Because he can only have a view that's aligned with the Pope, if I'm correct.
Well, that's one of the big issues is that as a Catholic, he doesn't have Scripture alone as his authority. It's also man and the church.
Right.
Right. It's whatever the current Pope deems
Which would be a
is
logical
correct.
outcome of his thought process there. If he doesn't have Scripture alone as the authority, and it's also man's authority, so he would be able to then say, okay, we have to go with man's reasoning and make sure that's right.
Oh man, I swung my mic over to Joey, thinking he was going to lay something down. Go ahead.
I was just gonna repeat.
Let's just clap.
I was just gonna
Yeah.
say. I was just gonna say what Jesse said.
Oh,
but,
man, I'm sorry. I didn't
he's-
mean to
no,
beat you
no,
to
no,
it.
no.
What?
You said that it's just man's authority, and like he's essentially just given all of the authority to man to decide what is right and what is
Yeah.
wrong, and he's taken God out of the equation. Which, man, like if I don't know what he's Catholic. I don't know what his views are of the Bible, but clearly it's not an authoritative thing in his life.
Yeah.
For the fact that you say, dude, you got to remove it like that is crazy to me.
Yeah, the fact that he would hold that the Bible is less than man's view, that man's view should be over it.
Right.
So yeah, it's,
I actually had Oh, go ahead.
Matt, you need to repent, brother. I love you. But oh my gosh, man, that was terrible.
Check your heart.
Yeah, and where's that one spot? Let's see. He says, if you appeal to an authority that they do not think is an authority, your argument will succeed in making you look pious. Okay, so what is it that a humanist or any non-Christian does in order to persuade any of us Christians to their point of view? What do? They appeal to an authority.
Yeah.
Would we tell them that
yeah.
they're not allowed to appeal to their authorities?
Oh, yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah, because if he's saying we can't have an authority,
how come Matt's not telling humanists that no, you're not allowed to use your human authorities or your quote unquote logic or science, which you couldn't have that without the precondition of God anyway.
Yeah.
But he's not telling anybody else to put away their authorities. He's only telling Christians to put away their authority.
Yeah, I mean, basically, he's falling in line with humanists who would tell us, "Put your sword away. You don't need your authority."
Yeah.
And it's like, no, man, that's our authority. That is going to maintain my authority because that has to be God's revealed revelation to us. Should be the thing that we use to go forward. It's in every area of life that we have to use that.
Yeah, and the beauty of using God as our authority is that it's something outside of ourself, which therefore isn't like circular in that it comes back to me, that I am the subjective authority in my own life, that I get to pick all of the things. And that's what he's doing. He's saying, hey, everybody else gets to pick what is authoritative except for us.
Yeah.
And it's completely unfair, and one, in argumentation, and two, it's wrong. So
yeah.
So that happened, and then Saitin has been basically blowing him up to try and get a debate. He says, Saitin says, I highly doubt that he would be willing to debate me on this, but pray that he would so this garbage can be exposed for what it is.
Oh, I love Sai.
Burn.
Yeah, good
That's
stuff.
awesome.
So, but, I mean, that's huge, and for, for especially for a Catholic who, for whatever you want to say about Catholics, is generally, especially to the outside world, under the umbrella of Christianity, to just wipe our authority out from under us like that's disheartening.
Yep.
Cool, guys. Where are we at? Are we about ready for a break?
Let's see where
How far are we?
We're about 16 minutes in, man. Yeah, we can take a break.
Let's take a quick break. We'll go regroup, and then we'll get into this Andrew Yang and his well-dressed socialism.
Let's do that. All right, welcome back to Reconciled Radio. So, we're going to get into the more serious topic for our episode today. And, guys, robots are taking over our jobs?
I heard about this.
Yeah.
Robots are taking over our jobs for years.
Yeah.
I wish they would take over our parenting.
Wow. All right.
And that's it for episode 8.
We'll see you guys later. No, so, there was a topic that is...
Hang on. Think about it. Automated parenting.
Automated parenting?
You know what I'm saying?
Is that the biblical mandate?
I'm a little worn out.
Does it make work not as toilsome?
All right, sorry. Go ahead.
So there's a topic that's been going around the works in social media and podcasts and things like that. And it was interesting because it seems like it's someone who's not that well known, yet he's getting a lot of coverage. It is Andrew Yang, a Democrat presidential candidate. Oh, don't
clap. Okay.
Democratic presidential candidate for 2020, and his platform that he's running on is universal basic income. And so, what we wanted to do today was discuss that from a biblical worldview. So, does this work? Could it work? Does it fall in line with biblical direction? Does it fall in line with what God says about work, about economics, and according to contrary thought, the Bible does speak about economics, right?
In the word, yeah. Oh, yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yes. I was going to answer your other questions in the words of our brothers at Cross and Crown. Short answer, no. Long answer, no.
So he is calling for universal basic income, and essentially that is about $1,000 per month per person because robots are taking over our jobs.
I can't even take it seriously.
So, before we get into it, because
right.
we have a lot of different things that we can get into, so
Would you stop laughing at him, Brian?
I'm not laughing at him. I'm laughing at Wang.
He's laughing with me.
Yang.
Or at me, either one. I don't really care. So I got three things that come to my mind immediately when I first heard this and first thought about it. So robots taking over our jobs. So first out of the three things. First one is Terminator, just because.
Yep.
Yeah, Skynet.
That makes full sense.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense.
Second one is a fundamental misunderstanding of economics.
Yep.
And the third one, and
Matrix?
this has more to do less with what Andrew Yang is proposing, but more for like because this is another thing that's been coming up a lot too, is like AI takeover.
Yeah.
That like AI can reach singularity, and then it's going to basically take over the world and stuff like that. And guys, correct me if I'm wrong. Can that happen in God's world?
The fundamental misunderstanding with AI completely taking over is you have to uphold a humanistic worldview that does not see a God that is in and of his creation. So no, it would have to be a world where God is completely removed, where human beings aren't made in the image of their creator, for that to happen. Now, is AI going to continue and technology going to continue to advance? Absolutely.
Right.
And most of that is because of the freedom that the gospel has brought to the Western world.
Yeah,
might
exactly.
I add.
Yep. And another thing too is I was listening to a podcast recently. It was the podcast Cultish that Jeremiah Roberts does, and they did an episode on like the Church of AI, because there's essentially there's like this church that's developing that like they're thinking AI is like the next is this God, and so they have to basically they're making churches to this God being like, oh, it's going to take over, so we want to be the ones who are going to be like, we
want to worship this.
we want to worship this new AI. And they made an amazing point, and it kind of goes into the dominion mandate a little bit, and it was in this world that God has created, we as humans were given dominion over the world, right?
True.
And we see that right in Genesis. And we can't see AI take over because AI and robotics and things like that, that's made in the fallen image of man, not in the image of the Creator. We
Amazing.
are made in the image of the Creator.
Yeah.
And so that can't happen in God's world.
Amazing.
So I would mean that, but the robot overlord stuff aside.
While we're on the topic, though,
Yeah.
I'm going to add that to my list of desired AI. I want AI parenting and AI pastoral duties. Can you just program him to be like perfect in wisdom and character, or no?
Well, that's what they're saying. Like,
But that goes to what they're saying, because can a fallen human being program a perfect AI?
right.
Well, didn't they just came out with a ATM machine where you can go and get sermons and stuff.
An ATM machine?
An ATM.
What do you mean? You swipe your spiritual debit card?
Basically,
How does that work?
it was made out of an old ATM.
What?
What do you mean? And it spits out a sermon for you?
Like a
Yeah.
preset manuscript that you
Yes.
can just read off of?
Yes.
What the heck?
Sign me up.
Well, I'll
No, I'm
tell you
just
what,
kidding.
they're late to the game, because I was in youth ministry and there's about 500 websites that you can do that on.
Yeah.
Just pay them $15 and they'll
Yeah,
send you a
And
sermon.
they'll write a sermon for you. Good grief.
Yeah, it's weird.
So anyway, like I said, robot overlord stuff aside, Yang does make the case that automation will ultimately push people out of jobs, which it has. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and disagree with the fact that automation's never put. It's like
It's changed
it's
jobs.
changed jobs.
It hasn't
That's
replaced-
yes, it's a good nuance we should put on that. It has definitely changed jobs, and right before we get into like some of the nitty gritty of all this, like I work, and so does Jacob, on
too.
automation rich, and you too soon.
Shortly.
Yeah, shortly. You're going to be working in machine shop and things like that. And for me, looking at it and seeing how it was done before, because what I do is basically program a machine to then machine other parts.
Right.
And it does it all automated, essentially. You have CNC lathes that go, it's robotics, essentially, hydraulics and everything else that are coming through and doing all the work for you. I really don't want to do it apart from having a robot do it. Like, it's just...
But think about this. Will that line ever stop? Because essentially this argument is that at some point your job will be taken away by AI. So there'll be an AI to program the AI to cut the metal,
program the AI, yeah.
but you'll still have to be in charge of the AI that programmed the AI.
Exactly.
To cut the
I mean,
metal.
there's human. There's nothing. There are studies that have been done that show that human ability to make decisions on the fly. Now, of course, they argue that robotics or programs will be able to do this, where they can make those split-second decisions on the fly. Yeah. But you have to also make decisions like ethical decisions and moral decisions and things like that a machine can't do.
Well, a machine can't know when something is breaking or when something is there's a sensor that's not working properly.
Right.
It can't know these things.
I mean, it can to a certain extent, but
guys, this takes me to iRobot. Why Will Smith was so upset with the robots, bro. Why? Because that little girl was dying, and the robot saved him instead of her.
Right.
And he's like, dude, that's not human.
Yeah, no, bro.
Like, no, like, this isn't working.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, like, as much as Will Smith, I think, is off on a lot of things, man, he gets that right.
Dude, I love his movies.
Yeah, his movies are great.
Right.
Hey, and joking aside, my wife and I were in the kitchen the other day having a discussion about AI, and I was asking her, hey, do you think that AI will ever take over? And we kind of joked about it. So she laughed, I laughed, the toaster laughed, and I shot the toaster.
Were you waiting with that one?
Yeah.
That was
awesome.
well played.
Oh, that was great. So yeah, I mean, having a little bit of prior experience, like, and I think it was Marcus Pittman who made this comment, talking about AI, and I think he was on that Cultish episode, and he made the point that automation and robotics is actually helping to make the toil of work easier.
Right.
Basically going and like you made the comment a little bit ago about the gospel, going forward, and that actually making things better, and actually this automation is a step that we have taken to make work less hard. Like, and he made the point that there's a guy on a farm has a combine that's all automated, and he can sit back. He has to still maintain control over it and make sure everything's running properly, but he gets to sit back and he reads a Kindle all day,
right,
while the combine's going back and forth and cutting all the field. And it's like, yeah, that makes work a little easier, rather than us always having to do that. And so he made a good point. I would say that it's actually a sign of that post mill.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah. And you just think about and another thing that needs to be said is every time there's been a quote unquote industrial revolution, and I think Andrew Yang makes a point that we're like in the fourth one or something. I can't remember what he said. But
revolution.
every time this happens, or every time a new technology comes out, there's somebody screaming about the fact that this is going to make us lose jobs and we're all going to be, but that's never ever been the case. Not once in the course of history. It's adjusted jobs. It's changed.
It's changed them,
our occupations, but it's never.
But humans adapt.
Well, you see, you make more jobs. You make different jobs.
Right.
You make new things happen. You don't just say, "Oh no, there's AI."
And his argument was though that these he talks about truck drivers and things like that, where it's like a 49-year-old truck driver. How easy are you going to have him go to a different job? How who's done this his whole life? How easy is it going to be for him to find a new job?
Yeah.
And it's like, but these robotic trucks, I mean, maybe they need to be washed.
Yeah,
and it's not just that.
It's like you can start businesses to do that kind of stuff.
Right now, you have AI trucks. We have it, but right now, there's still a booming industry for truck drivers.
Yeah.
They can't get enough.
Yeah. Well, because as of right now, I mean, we still need people operating,
right?
To a certain extent, and maintaining control, and like, again, going back to that, humans being able to make decisions on the fly and know that, like, hey, this automated truck is about to cream into a six car pileup,
right,
and how is it really going to know to stop on time, or how much destruction is it going to cause? Whereas we, as humans, can look and go, hey, if I deviate this off, maybe I'll sacrifice myself, but I'll save these people.
Actually,
and it's
that technology is there, because even 6 years ago, my aunt had a car that it has sensors, and if you were sitting down texting your phone and you were cruising on the freeway at 60 miles an hour,
which you should not be doing.
It'll actually sense a car in front of you, and it'll, outside of your control, it'll hit the brake. So that technology is there. But it's like if the trucks get automated, you'll still need somebody to maintain the trucks.
Yeah.
And if the maintenance of the trucks gets automated, you'll need somebody to maintain the automation that maintains the truck. So it's
these jobs will end up.
But this is where worldview comes, and even within the Christian worldview, this is where an optimistic worldview changes the way you think about things, because ultimately, as post-millennialists, our hope is that this new creation is here, and it's coming more fully every day, not going the opposite direction.
Right.
Because, remember, we're not reading news headlines, we're not looking at AI, we're not looking at the future of automation, but we're using God's Word as our standard for what we believe about the future.
Yeah, perfect revealed Word of God, which is going to be applicable to all of life, and it really is going to be the best guiding point out of anything. And that's, a lot of people have, you're talking about an optimistic view. A lot of people, when it comes to this kind of stuff, and this is just a joke point, but they have such this, pessimistic view, they're going to take over and it's the end of the world. We're just going to, again, that's why Terminator was one of my first points, because it's that seems to be the mentality they have, is kind of it's just going to destroy everything, and we're going to, so many people are going to be out of jobs, and everything's going to crash, and nobody knows what to do. Right. And it's for the thing that came to my mind first is okay, if you really think that, why are you still developing AI?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because Elon Musk, the king of AI, he was on Rogan several months back. Remember when he got in trouble for smoking weed on camera?
Oh, yeah.
And all his stocks dropped and all that? That was funny. But Rogan asked him, because the thing, I used to love Joe Rogan's podcast, but every single week he gets into the same stuff, and it almost always gets into AI. I'm just worn out with him, and he's a dirty humanist. We're praying for him, though. But he asked Musk about whether he thought that AI was eventually going to take over, and he said a couple things that were interesting. One, he said AI has already taken over because we're already, by the use of our phones, only communicating through that like realm. And two, he said, yeah, I do think it'll ultimately take over, but I'm not pessimistic about it. I think it'll be a good thing. So even, there's people outside of the post-mill world that are actually optimistic about even AI taking over. Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, Andrew Yang, so he's running on this basis.
Can we talk about the socialist?
Yeah. So he's running on universal basic income because he's basically saying that all these jobs are going to be automated away, and so what we should do as kind of a safety net for people is give them a universal basic income of $1,000 a month to help them, to make the transition easier. Okay. That seems to be the point that he's made across the board, was just to make the transition easier of trying to work. And he also kind of goes off the basis that if big government gives people money, that it'll actually create the incentive to actually go and create things, to be creative, to start jobs, to be entrepreneurial, and which he is an entrepreneur, and so that's the mindset that he has. So there's this kind of worldview already put into it. He goes, if we just give people the freedom, they're going to in turn be entrepreneurs as well.
Do I have to wait?
No, go ahead.
To destroy this? Let's play the clip.
Okay, well,
right.
No, actually, if it was the first point you're talking about, let's go into that because we go into this. Because this is going to change a little bit.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so he wants to give everybody money?
Yeah.
$1,000?
Yeah.
All right.
$12,000 a year. Ultimately,
$1,000 every month to every... He did say on Shapiro, and I thought this is interesting, you're going to be able to opt in. You don't have to take it.
You don't have to.
But if you opt in, you're going to lose your other government benefits. Yes. I thought that was really interesting.
It was interesting.
So you can keep one of the two social or welfares.
I didn't know I had any benefits.
Yeah. But to that first point, two things real quick. Taxation is theft. In order to give out $1,000 every month to people, you must take it coercively from others. None of us signed any kind of agreement. Now, if people want to voluntarily offer up an extra amount of taxation or voluntarily give some extra money so that people can have a universal basic income, that's one thing. Voluntary giving is one thing. But at the end of the day, he's proposing that we steal money to redistribute. And here's the thing. Here's my second point. If where is this at? Oh crap, I lost it. Hang on. If your ultimate goal is that you want, or if your ultimate concern and aim is for people to have more money in their pockets at the end of the month, why not just stop taking it away in the first place?
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my points, like towards the end. I'm glad you brought that up now.
So he says we want to give everybody $1,000 every month so that they have a little extra spending money to ease the pain.
Yeah.
Just stop taxing them.
Yeah.
Stop taking all the money and let them actually save some of that money.
Stop massive federal income taxing, which would be like a Rand Paul type. What he kind of proposes is like, well, the best kind of tax would be none.
Right.
And it's like, that's correct. Like, if you want to give these people extra money, stop taxing them.
So I don't know what all the percentages are, but I think in Michigan the flat tax rate is 14.5% on your income.
Yeah.
So you're literally taking that 14.5% from their paychecks, and then you're pretending to give them back money at the end of the month. You're literally not doing anything. And I haven't worked out the numbers, but I'd be surprised if that $1,000 makes up between income tax and all the sales tax you pay on all the things that you bought out, and the fees that you pay at the State Department and all that. You're probably not even getting back the full amount that you'd paid in taxes that whole month anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
It's all right. So we actually have a clip from the Joe Rogan show. So Andrew Yang was on Joe Rogan. This was a few weeks back, probably, and he's been on. I think we mentioned it already. He was on Shapiro just recently. So this was the Sunday special that he always releases, which came out today. We listened to a little bit of it, but so he's been on quite a few different podcasts and different shows that are really well known, and so he's gaining some traction.
Very smart, by the way. He's the only one doing these popular podcasts.
Yeah, he's extremely...
By doing that, that's a smart move for his campaign.
Yeah, it's a very smart move. He even mentioned that on Joe Rogan, where he was just like, a lot of people listen to you. It's good that you have me on. I'm glad you have me on because now my name is getting put out there. And so we have a clip, and the reason I have this clip among all the other ones that I could have had was because I wanted to show how worldview really plays a part in the decisions that people make. Because when it comes to economics or things like that, which economics, all it really is the study of human choices in regards to scarcity. Okay. So you have, this, when it comes to economics as a whole, you're studying human choices and worldview plays a factor into that. Worldview plays a factor into, either if you have a Christian worldview or you have a non-Christian worldview, that worldview is going to dictate then how you're going to decide and how you're going to do different things. So I think this clip really showed a good amount of the kind of worldview that he was putting into this, and so I thought it was kind of interesting. So,
hit me.
Yeah, so this is about 17 minutes or so into the podcast. They kind of just did introductions and talked about his plan, his universal basic income, which he calls the Freedom Dividend Act. Which
it's free.
It sounds so everyone is a patriot. Like, yay!
I'm shaking my head.
Freedom Dividend Act. Yeah, everybody can see it. They shift into why this is why he's really calling for this and what's going to some of the helpful aspects of it. He's kind of trying to make points for the helpful aspects, and he gets into one about jails and about people.
One of my favorite topics.
Yeah, and talking about keeping people out of jail. So this is Andrew Yang on the Joe Rogan.
If you don't press play, I'm going to explode in excitement.
I was in New Hampshire last month. And a prison guard said to me, this is a prison guard, he said we should pay people to stay out of jail because we waste so much money when they're in jail. Like, he sees all the waste in the system. So if you imagine a society where everyone's getting $1,000 a month, that's it's a great incentive to try and stay out of jail because, you stop getting it if you wind up in jail. And it reduces recidivism because when you come out of jail, at least you have $1,000 a month waiting for you, and then you're less inclined to commit a crime and head back in.
How much crime do you think you'd actually prevent though by giving people $1,000?
Before we move on, before Joe actually makes a good point and rebuttal a little bit to it, so far, how do you guys think that?
Hate it. Well, he's. Just in that one point, are you asking?
Yeah.
He misses the idea. I mean, he's basically what he's assuming is that a certain amount of magical money. By the way, this $1,000 is totally arbitrary as well. He hit on it a little bit in Shapiro's interview, but he's making the mistake that human nature is going to be changed by some kind of dollar amount.
Yeah, it's almost that, and again, that comes to worldview. If you have the worldview that, money will be what helps these people.
Right.
Money, giving people more money, that's going to, really make them be able to make smart choices.
Yeah,
and
just
like that.
Stop taking the money.
You got something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to some degree, if it's sympathetic, I understand where he's coming from because
right.
I have family who've been in and out of prison, and
right.
I've seen the struggle for them to get assimilated back into society and all of that. But just giving people free stuff isn't the answer because we're just it's funny, you probably put them in prison for stealing or robbing somebody, and now you're going to steal and rob for somebody else to give to them.
Yeah, it almost seems counterproductive.
It's incredibly hypocritical.
Yeah,
and it's just I understand that side of it, but
I understand the need for that to happen. People do that come out of prison system. It's hard for them to do that. And Shapiro made a good point of this. It was on the podcast with Andrew Yang where he says in this culture it seems that we have more of a crisis of purpose. And I don't see how cutting a check for a free check from the government for $1,000 is really going to solve that.
Right, absolutely. I completely agree. I can just testify because I have family really close to me, and man, when they get out, what they lack is a sense of purpose, not income.
Yep.
And when they're driven by purpose, it changes everything.
And where would we say that person would get their value and where they would get that purpose from?
Absolutely, man. The gospel, 100%.
Yep.
And that's why it's important.
Yeah.
Man, we got to reach them because the answer isn't $1,000 from the government.
No.
The answer is the gospel. And
yes. Real quick. The other thing too is on that prison thing where he's wanting people to be able to get back on their feet and supply them some sort of amount of money that's going to help them reestablish themselves and all that. Well, first of all, the prison system in general is not justice at all according to God's law. Throwing somebody in a cage for a crime that they committed and then using taxpayers' money to pay for their housing and food for however many years, that's not justice. Nobody has received retribution. So justice hasn't been done. But also what happens is the humanistic model of the prison system is what happens when you get out of prison. You have that on your record forever, and you have to disclose that information to every single employer until then. So whoever they committed the crime against never got retribution, and they say that in order for that criminal to go do the time for their crime, they go do the time for their crime, but once they get out, they're still being punished for the rest of their life.
Yeah, they're still doing that.
So
time.
now you're just holding them down.
Yep.
All right.
So let's continue.
People $1,000 a month. I think most of the people that are doing crime, whether it's thievery or assault, they're not thinking this out. This is just either a way of life for them, either they've got real mental issues or a pattern of behavior that they can't break. I really don't think that $1,000 a month is going to fix any of that.
Sin, Joe. The word you're looking for is sin.
Yeah, I knew you were kind of trying to find the words, but yeah, sin would be that one. And that's exactly one of the things that I wanted to point out was, I would actually say, Rogan, you kind of make a good point, because ultimately that money is not going to, how much is that $1,000 a month going to keep people from doing those things? If we look at the biblical worldview, if crime is in your heart, if sin is in your heart to commit it, giving you $1,000 a month, is that going to stop that?
I could get rid of $1,000 in one trip to the bookstore, dude.
Yeah, right.
Can't confirm.
Like maybe $1 million would keep somebody from crime.
Yeah, and how much is that? Yeah, how is that going to work?
That's 2 trips to the bookstore.
Yeah, and that's where worldview really comes into play here. I mean, if you have that view that this money is what's going to keep people out, and especially when it comes to the prison system, that I'm pretty sure how it works is the more people you fill into a prison, the more money that prison gets.
Rushton spoke to this a lot, and it's the idea that the state can be your messiah, and that's exactly what Yang is doing.
Yeah.
He's trying to save people by the power of the state.
Yeah, it's almost like, robots are taking over. We need our savior. Big government.
What Yang is proposing is that the state save people by giving them a certain amount of money.
Yeah. Trying to keep them from sin.
That's humanism at its peak.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a big nuance. I didn't even, I kind of saw that, but that's a good way to put it. I like that.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
He complimented me.
So beautiful.
Let's continue.
It's going to fix any of that.
Well, it's not going to fix all of it, for sure. I mean, we'll still have jails. It's not like...
I like how he just admits it right off. Oh, yeah, no, it's not going to fix it.
It's not like, silver bullet.
Yeah.
But at the margins, would it keep, like, that person who's falling through the cracks and feels like they have no place in society, and maybe they, it's like the people around them are also like, hey, you don't have any value, and you get $1,000 a month, maybe like it keeps them off at the margins, and everything we're talking about is at the margins. I mean,
yeah, that's going to keep me out.
Yeah, so there was a phrase in there, I don't know if you guys caught that, but when he said, these people are saying, you don't have any value. Where's our value wrapped up in? Right. Is it money?
Right.
No, our value is given by God as the creator, and we have inherent value to the human life because we are made in the imago Dei, the image of God.
And while he's waxing poetic about people's value, if you assume that somebody gets out of prison and doesn't have a job or any income at all Yang did was value that person's life at $1,000 a month. Wow.
Yeah.
Very
well done.
Very righteous of you.
Definitely giving a thing. And it's just, that's humanism right there at its core, saying that human value is wrapped up into
He put a number on
it.
He said somebody's life is worth $1,000 is essentially, right? I mean, because he's saying that's the cost of that person's life to put them in a position where they're going to regain value.
Yeah.
Is that it?
That was it for that clip, but I actually have another one that I wanted to play for you guys. This one I thought was kind of telling. This is further into the show, and we'll kind of switch gears a little bit, but we'll kind of be going into all these things as we kind of, look at this whole concept of universal basic income. But this one was just a sub thing that I wanted to bring up because I thought this was really, really interesting, especially with the work that I've done before and the things that I'm passionate about when it comes to anti-abortion ministries and things like that. I thought this was just a really interesting statement.
All-time highs is like all these negative social indicators. Here are things that are at all-time lows. Getting married, starting a business, having a kid, moving for a new job. All of those things are at historic lows in the United States of America.
Having children, really?
Yeah, we're at record low birth rates right now. And it's largely because people feel too strapped to have kids. I mean,
so we have low birth rates because people feel strapped to have kids. So
I don't think that's the reason.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that abortion would be the number one killer of kids and why we have such low birth rates in this country, because I'm pretty sure it's out of convenience. You don't want a kid because it's not convenient for you right now. And that's where it really plays into a lot of the work that I've done, and that's exactly the mindset of most of the people who even would agree with abortion or things like that, where it's like, oh, no, it's necessary at times. No, it's out of convenience. And then, of course, they'll go, oh, what about rape and incest? Yeah, that counts for less than 2% of abortions. And so the majority of them are out of convenience.
So he's saying our birth rates are at an all-time low. In 2017, these are old stats, 879,000 abortions took place in the United States.
Yeah.
Abortion is not good for the health of babies.
No, it's actually
it's really hard on them.
Yeah, it's very, very, very hard on them.
That's just ridiculous.
Well, do you see 2015, it was 913,000.
Oh.
Wow.
You know, actually, we are making some progress.
We are.
Abortion is becoming less popular even amongst...
It is. In 2017, it was 892. So, I mean, we're gradually dropping. You know, Christ is working through this.
Yeah, and I would think that would be the Christians actually rising up and being, gospel-centered and going, we need to speak out against this. And you see tons and tons of churches that have really started this and really, like Apologia, for instance. I have deep affection for those guys. I've worked with them. I love what they do, and they've sparked so many other churches to then do this movement. And so, but anyway, that was just a little sub thing that he would really make the claim that we have low birth rates because of lesser jobs, even though some of the stats and some of the studies would show that areas that prosper highly have even lower birth rates. And so it's not from the fact that we are struggling that we're not having kids. It's a lot of the times it's people who actually make tons of money that, oh no, it's not convenient right now.
And typically low income families you'll see have a lot more kids.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you account for that? And it's just it was fascinating. So there was a little little sub thing that I wanted to go into.
So are you guys going to vote for him?
Yeah. No, and that's what's really funny. And I wasn't sure when I was going to make this point, but I told you guys a little bit before we even started recording McDermott's quote, what he usually says. And this to me seems to really apply, because when it comes to all of us in our human natures, when we say, oh, a free $1,000 a month, I mean, does that really sound bad? It's like, yeah, I mean, I could do a lot with an extra $1,000 a month. But as McDermott says, and he spoke about this with the schools and public schools and things like that, but I think it applies here. He says, don't take the cheese. Like, just because it sounds good, it looks good on paper, it doesn't mean that it's actually going to work and it's actually beneficial. It's not. Because ultimately, like you had said before, if we're stealing money from people to give to others, that system doesn't work.
We could have ended this podcast by playing that clip and then just saying "Thou shalt not steal."
Yeah, exactly.
That's all it comes down to apply a biblical worldview to this idea of UBI. Do not steal, and here's another thing that we should talk about real quick too, because aside from stealing, we also have a huge problem of fake fiat money in our nation, where we got rid of the gold standard in the 70s. I think it was 72 if I remember right. So. The government is just arbitrarily asserting value to these paper bills that we have, and there's nothing to back it up. And so that gives them a lot of freedom to just do whatever they want. And the Old Testament speaks to that, too. I can't remember the exact verbiage, but we're called to maintain true measures and weights for our dealings with each other.
Yeah.
And these pieces of paper aren't worth anything except for the government just arbitrarily says that this $5 bill is worth $5. There's nothing to back that up. There's no standard to base that on. And so when they're giving out $1,000 to everybody who opts in every month, not only are they taxing everybody for it, but they're also just using nonsense money. It's not even real.
Right.
So
yeah, and it just doesn't seem like it's an actual solution, to an actual poverty. If you have areas that are, high poverty and things like that, cutting a check to somebody for $1,000 a month that is, again, like you said, arbitrary, it's not going to help the situation. Again, our value is not wrapped up in money. Our value, I believe, is what Shapiro said, a crisis of purpose. We have a huge crisis of purpose, and it just seems to me that how economics works is off of incentives. You have to develop incentives. There has to be certain incentives on both aspects. Obviously, when you make a transaction, there's incentive for you to want to buy that. There's incentive for the person to want to make money, and it develops incentives, and that's how economics works. What incentive are we really giving to people if we're going to say we're going to give you $1,000 to do nothing? I'm pretty sure the incentive would be to continue doing nothing.
I remember when a couple months back, a bunch of conservatives cheered Trump for causing a whole bunch of the car manufacturers to come back to the United States. And the way he did that was not just, no Christian should have cheered it. What he did to force them out of Mexico and get them back into Michigan and other states around the area was he threatened them with higher tariffs in Mexico. He's essentially saying, we're going to regulate and tax the crap out of you in Mexico unless you come back.
Wow.
If he wanted to be just and if he wanted to be biblical, all he would have had to do is remove regulation and remove taxation and remove the all the hoops that you have to jump through to do business here in America.
Yeah,
how many people-
not make it worse.
Not make it
threaten
worse.
to make it worse.
Yep.
You don't threaten somebody for doing business across some imaginary line. All you have to do is remove the regulation here, and they'll gladly come back.
Yeah.
So, and I say that to say that in order to create incentive, we don't want government intervention for incentives either. Like I don't want any subsidies for any businesses creating product. I don't want anything like that. The incentive of the free market is enough. Jesse, if you and I agree to trade corn for rice, and we agree on certain amounts of rice that are valued at the corn, the incentive is that we both gain because you had something that I needed and I had something that you needed. We don't need government to even create incentives.
And what's funny about the way that economics works in a free market area, which would be the more biblical model as far as us putting value to those different things, economics, it's the incentive value that's put onto is subjective. I'm not saying I'm a subjectivist. Obviously, there's absolute truth. So I'm not saying that at all.
But a car's only worth as much as I want to pay for it.
Exactly. And so to me, in a system that is subjective when it comes to that, it's extremely hard to actually make predictions about how it would how it would play out in the future. And so for me, anybody who's making claims, oh, this is going to happen in 6 years, this is going to happen in 10 years, the economy is going to tank because of this, blah blah blah. I'm a little wary of that because how in the world can you actually make those kind of statements and actually make those judgments when all these things can be subjective and change on a dime?
Yeah, and if you're operating outside of a gospel worldview, outside of a biblical worldview, what you're doing is you're saying that, or let me put it positively, the gospel gives us the means to say that an image bearer in China or an image bearer in Mexico creating products has the same value in God's eyes as a image bearer creating a product in America. You don't, because as soon as you tariff one or incentivize one through subsidies than the other, you're actually arbitrarily placing more value on one image bearer than another, and the gospel destroys that.
Yeah, and there's a couple other things that the gospel destroys, and one of them, which I actually think is a deeper problem with UBI, is that it allows people not to find ways to add value to their communities. So if we're talking about automation coming in and developing, and actually taking jobs out of communities and taking these things away from them, to me, when you look at the Bible and look at what God, in the mandate that he gave, to Adam to cultivate, make the world beautiful, do all these things, which I would argue still continues, especially after the flood and all that kind of stuff, where work is now, perpetually becoming less of a struggle, less hard, and yet we are still to have that mandate to go out and be salt and light and still to be, a thing. If automation is going to take those things away, and then all of a sudden we're just going to pay people, to not do anything, that is taking value away from people actually human interaction and value in a community. And so it doesn't just take away the value of their work, but it takes away the relational value that a community is going to have, with people actually doing human-to-human interaction. I mean, that's one thing that I would say from a biblical worldview, when we look at what God says about work, and us working and going out and doing something, there's a lot of purpose in that. Yep. There's a lot of meaning to that, and there's a lot of, a lot of people hate their jobs. There's times where I hate my job, but ultimately, when I know that I'm providing for my family, when I know that I'm doing all these kind of things, it's important, and God instills that into us, I believe. And when we really follow his commands and really follow what he would have for us, it's amazing that, how the sense of fulfillment that you have out of that. And to me, it's like you're just something like that can just ultimately destroy a community rather than having good human interaction.
Well, and we've seen it happen in communist nations.
Yeah.
I mean, when this is tried, nations are destroyed.
Yeah.
Without exception.
Yeah.
Well, the most notable right now is Venezuela.
Yeah, Venezuela, Cuba, same thing. But yeah, Venezuela. I saw a really powerful picture of Venezuela the other day of this street in some downtown city, and it was just the gutters or where the pavement meets the curb was lined with paper money because the government had completely devalued it by their regulations and socialism.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it just completely lost all purpose. So it was so unimportant to people that it was they were literally just like taking it out of their pockets and leaving it on the street.
It's almost like receipts here, where it's like, what does this mean?
It's like a Walgreens receipt. Is that necessary?
What does this mean? That's like most of the time when I'm
actually, funny thing, while we're on socialism and receipts,
yeah.
and with California, they did some regulations on plastic straws
a
couple months ago.
Yeah.
But I just saw a new bill that's coming up, and they're actually going to start regulating the length of your receipts. So Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, you're not going to get away with these 3.5 feet receipts
You know
anymore.
what? I'm actually okay with that. There are times, like especially like Meijer and like Walmart and places like that, man, you get your receipt like, oh, hold on, it's printing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just killed 4 trees with one receipt.
Like, really? Do I need all that? Oh, but these are the coupons. You want these.
That's awesome. You know, another basic question that we just need to ask is, what has God charged the government to do?
To uphold justice.
To uphold justice. Biblical government is strictly judicial. Punish evildoers by due process in the courts. That's it.
Yeah, and you want to know something interesting, and I'm glad you actually brought that up, because if the government is supposed to be, you know, instituting justice and what their God-given command is to be, you start having these kind of social welfare programs and all these kind of things. The problem is there's a difference between, we would say, there's a difference between justice and love, right? And what happens in these socialistic programs is that what they're trying to do is essentially connect love and justice. And I wrote this down because I thought it was a good point. They're trying to connect love and justice into one thing. Basically, they're saying they're working to control people to do the loving thing, which they're like, we're going to take your money because it needs to go to these people. We're going to force you to do the loving thing, which in turn violates justice.
Yeah.
You know, there's no justice in that.
And violates love.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you've not loved your neighbor if you've stolen from them.
Yep. And so that's why ultimately socialistic welfare programs or socialistic programs that, you know, anybody wants to put into place, it's ultimately not going to work.
Yeah. Do you have more? I have a question that I want to ask, but I'll wait.
No, you're good.
So I want to change the conversation a little bit. How much time are we at? Are we about ready to wrap up, or
we got about 55 minutes?
Okay. We have 55
we
minutes.
We are at 55 minutes.
All right, cool. So I want to ask this question to you guys, because all this is really, you know, we're theology nerds. We like talking the politics. It's fun for us. But I think the important question to ask, or one of the important questions to ask is, do you guys think that these types of conversations are an important aspect of making disciples? Like if you meet a guy at work and we're having gospel conversations, we want him to come to know Jesus. Why are these conversations, or why is this topic even important? Are we just kind of getting into our little political reconstructionist huddles and doing it for fun, or if it's important, why?
I would say, and my firm belief in why it's important, especially when you're making disciples, is the Bible does speak about money and wealth and how we should manage money, because that's when it comes to even poverty. I think the biggest reason why people fall into poverty, and that's not always the case, but I think a big reason is it's not from lack of finances, it's mismanagement. Yeah. And the Bible does talk about, you know, good stewards, being good stewards of our money. And so when it comes to having a gospel conversation, especially when you're discipling somebody, it's really training them up too in what God has commanded about being a good steward and doing these kind of things. And so for me, it's even topics of Christian ethics in economics and different things like that are important conversations to have, and really getting people away from seeing the unbiblical socialistic type worldviews, and then really kind of putting in the biblical ones, so that people do know how to actually do this. You know, they do know how to be good stewards. You know, it's
what we're charged to do in the Great Commission.
Yeah.
Go out, make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded. And a lot of what God has commanded has to do with economics and how we handle our money. Having right weights and measurements, not stealing from your neighbor.
Yeah.
So it's super important, because as we introduce someone to Jesus, and the Spirit does a work in their heart, they're regenerated, they come to know Him. As disciplers, He's looking to us, or she's looking to us to go, okay, now what? How do I follow Jesus? How do I love Jesus? How do I worship Jesus? And that's where we come in with these things. And I'll say this, maybe some of this is peripheral. This might be weeks or months or even years into our teaching people what to obey with commands. It may start simpler to that. But it is part of what He's commanded. It is part of His law word. And it is important for that reason, because He needs to know what it means to love your neighbor. And I think God's law shows us how to do that. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Amen, man.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important for these conversations to be part of discipleship. You know, within the context of relationship, because God is in relationship, but even more so because, like, I'd say a lot of churches don't even talk about this stuff.
No,
ever, not even close.
They stay on the milk.
Yeah, they and if they are preaching the gospel on Sunday, it's just grace, 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 grace,
yeah.
And it's not like, man, how what does real application look like from the gospel?
Right, real worldview application.
Absolutely,
in life, yeah.
And we don't really address that in our churches. No. It's and this is why the American the Christendom in America is essentially gone, is because the churches have stopped talking about real application of how the gospel affects every aspect of our life, economically, how should we view the government, all of those things, and they just don't address it. And so when you remove that from discipleship, dude, this is what you get. And it's about time that we just start putting it back into discipleship and having real disciples being made and actually changing societies. One person at a time, but you got to start on the micro level before you hit the macro.
Exactly. That's why I think even realms like this and doing podcasts, I think they are, especially Christian ones, it's very important to, I believe, the kingdom. Ultimately, we're not like a church organization, but we're all the church. And so when we do things like this, and that's why, I've even kind of thought, even before we all started this, and I had ideas, a year back or so of it'd be nice to start a podcast, but it's why would I though? And it's that's why, because we're trying to help other people and make disciples. And it's and you've made the comment before, and I agree, there's times where it's we're not going to be able to, talk on the big levels with these big dogs like Rush doing, all these guys who really, do all these things. We're not on an R.C. Sproul level or anything like that.
We can disciple to our level.
Exactly, but not to say they're more or less or anything like that. I'm not saying that. We're all priesthood of all believers. But it's the little realm that we have. I mean, God puts people in certain areas for certain reasons, and the little kind of group that we have. If we can say something that helps somebody, then that's great. And so, to me, I think it's a good way to do that. And so, I think topics like this on podcasts, and not just that though. I mean, I'm just making that as a sub point, but it should be in churches. I like what you said there. It really should be taught in churches in a lot of different realms.
I do too, and I want to speak to something Joey said real quick, because if you walk into your typical, even Reformed churches, if you walk into your typical Reformed churches, no matter what passage they're in, you and I have talked about this a lot, most of our preachers are systematic. They know their big topics, and they'll get to grace, and they'll get to gospel eventually, which, praise God, we want the gospel preached every week.
Yeah.
But listen to what Hebrews 5 into 6 says. The author says, "For though by this time," or let me start with verse 11, chapter 5, verse 11, "About this we have much to say, and it is hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food, for everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, since he is a child. But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil." And then into chapter 6, "Therefore, let us leave the elementary doctrine of Christ." Think about what he's saying right there. Let us leave. You're calling the doctrine of Christ elementary and go on to maturity, not laying again a foundation of repentance from dead works and of faith towards God, and of instruction about washings, the laying on of hands, the resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment. And this we will do if God permits. He goes on, but you walk into a modern day church, even a Reformed church, and every single week, in a different form, you hear the same message, and very seldomly are you hearing somebody talk about right weights and measurements, or thou shalt not steal, or why we don't believe in abortion, or why we stand against socialism, or you won't even hear a pastor use the word humanist. And I just think we're missing that part of the Great Commission, man.
Yeah, and I think that, not that those aren't bad things to teach, but I think what the problem is, as well, in modern-day churches, is you almost have this infinite loop. Okay, we're going to teach you elementary things. Oh, we finish. Oh, let's just go right back to the beginning and then just start it all over again. Where it's no, at that point, we should be continuing on.
That passage right there is calling pastors to work themselves out of a job. He says, by this time, you guys should all be teachers. And how many people are... And I'm not saying that everybody's called to be a pastor.
Right.
I'm not saying everybody's called to lead a congregation. But I know a lot of people that have been sitting under a pastor or a group of pastors for 20-something years. Yeah. And they still might not be able to teach the commands of Jesus. And what is Jesus talking about when he says, teach them to obey my commands?
Right.
What is he talking about? All of it. Not just starting with the New Testament.
Yep, and that's what Paul says about Scripture, that all Scripture is God-breathed and profitable for rebuke and teaching and all these things.
And when he said that, they didn't have a New Testament in their hand at all.
No, it was the Old Testament. It was the Scriptures, the law. It was the Torah, the Tanakh, the Ketuvim, all these Old Testament scriptures, they were God-breathed
The
scriptures
one that
as well.
on the road to Emmaus, when Jesus caught up with those disciples, he said, "From Moses on, all
will
those
teach you
prophets,
all
those
about
were
me."
all about me. Every single one of those." So Jesus endorsed all that stuff, and a lot of pastors just don't even know what to do with it.
And so another Bible section, I believe, is in 1 Thessalonians or 2 Thessalonians. I can't remember, but it makes this point when it comes back to the UBI, the Universal Basic Income. When you say UBI, it sounds like
I'd rather have a UTI than a UBI, to be honest.
I was just going to say, like, it sounds like some kind of like disease. But Universal Basic
It is
Income,
a disease.
Looking at it from the biblical worldview, what does Paul say about people who don't work? He says, "You don't work, you don't eat."
Yep.
You know, I mean, obviously there are those who can't, but that's where the church then comes in, and that's where
Right.
more private charity organizations should be put up, and we should be developing that mindset of people to have that kind of mentality, to then want to give to the people who are unable to work, not just unwilling to work.
Yeah, and there's some dynamics there, because not only is the government exercising overreach when they engage in social welfare, but you probably could say that the church is failing in that and taking care of each other and doing their own voluntary welfare. But there's also an extra dynamic where you could make the point that and there is no excuses. We should be taken care of, but we also know that Christians are the most generous people on the face of the planet. People want to come down hard against it and say, well, why don't you guys fix all the problems? But Christians are by far the most generous people on the planet.
Well, and I get that from like anti-abortion people. They're like, "Oh, well, you Christians are railing against abortion, but you don't adopt children." I'm like, who are the people adopting the most kids?
Who are the people starting orphanages?
Yeah, who are the ones who actually started orphanages to try to find families for these people?
But the extra dynamic on that is to say that, listen, we would be a lot more free and we'd be a lot more able to give voluntarily to our church communities and even our non-church communities if we weren't taxed to death. So there's
Agreed.
lots of dynamics there.
Agreed. I mean, that's just when it comes to the biblical worldview of it. I mean, what we should really be striving to do is change the mindset of these people, and ultimately that means discipling them.
That's right.
And changing the mindset to want to work, to steward smartly, and ultimately to help provide more private charities to the people who are unable to work.
Earlier I said, I mentioned the churches and stuff in discipleship, but I do want to make clear that I think discipleship starts outside the church. Like, it starts in every relationship that we have, whether they are a confessing believer or not. Like, you are always guiding people to Christ, whether that be the elementary doctrine of Christ and the milk, or just the deep, hard, like, practical stuff. How does economics fit into the gospel? Whether you're working through it, no matter what. So I think, it's funny too, because when I think about Jesus and his interaction with Matthew, like, here's this dude who was a tax collector, and outright rebel, but like, dude, the dude wasn't a believer, like,
right.
And Jesus is like, hey, bro, come follow me, like,
Yeah.
we're gonna do this, and discipleship started there,
Yeah.
and we don't see the whole story of how that actually took place. We just get a real small glimpse of it.
But I have to believe that discipleship from Jesus himself, man, was revolutionary.
Absolutely, and so anyone we come across, believer, unbeliever, that we should be making disciples of all people, and let the Holy Spirit work through their hearts and do his thing. We're just the message people who are just coming to share the gospel and take someone from milk to some good old steak.
Amen.
Amen.
Venison.
Well, should I close this out?
Yeah, let's wrap this up. You guys, anything else to say? Anybody?
Oh, quick recommendation, quick meme of the week. Jake, if you
Can't
want to get
confirm.
yours ready, I do want to do a recommendation real quick. I'm
Yeah.
only about 8 chapters into this, but I've been reading Rush Junie's The Cure of Souls, Recovering the Biblical Doctrine of Confession, and it's just killer, man. Every time I pick up a new Rush Junie book, I'm just blown away. Talk about spiritual meat, man. Talk about getting beyond the milk and getting beyond the simple doctrines that we all loved and needed. But this book is fantastic. He kind of goes through the history of confession in the Christian church and in the Catholic church, and then starts getting into the real purpose of it, and just makes some really interesting points. One of the ones that stuck out to me was he was pointing out how, and he quoted somebody else saying that basically in order to get the full human experience, the humanistic worldview, and that just means any non-Christian worldview, they feel like they need to break. The more they can break taboos, the more they will kind of break free. And the end result of that, and we know this by people who get into drug addictions or pornography addictions or any other kind of just self-destructive thing, is everybody's actually looking for absolution. They're looking to have their sins forgiven. And the sneaky way that people like libertines, not libertarians, but libertines, people who just try to break every taboo they can possibly find, the way they try to seek absolution is by getting addicted to something and then just completely devour devouring that thing and essentially trying to either consciously or subconsciously destroy themselves to absolve themselves and remove themselves from society. So just deep stuff like that, where he's pointing out the absolute human necessity, the deep felt need for forgiveness of sins, and all the crazy ways that we try to go about that. And that's a humanistic way, but he really shows the errors that the church has made. And then, like I said, I'm only 8 chapters in. I cannot wait to get farther and see what his solution is. Yeah, so that's my recommendation of the week. If you guys are looking for a good book to read, get The Cure of Souls, Recovering a Biblical the Biblical Doctrine of Confession.
Cool.
All right, I got a meme. For those of you who haven't seen The Princess Bride, what's wrong with you? And that's where this is coming from. You got the scene where Judd Pirate Roberts is laying on the table. Someone's asking, is he dead? And he says, what are you, a Calvinist? He's only partly dead.
Go show the video, Jay. You got to go hold up your meme to the camera.
We're going to do it that way.
We
could just actually good segue. If you want to see the meme and other things that we have happening, head on over to Facebook page for Reconciled Media. There you will see the memes of the week that we do. We'll have pictures of the recommendations that we have, and you can see all the little things that we are doing.
Yeah. Also, you can subscribe. Check us out on iTunes. Did you already say this? iTunes, Podbean, YouTube. Go like and subscribe to our channel. Leave us an honest review, and join us next week for episode 9. We will have something cooking for you. Hey, I love you guys.
Love you too.
I love you.
No, this has been awesome. Thank you guys. And Christians, go cultivate a kingdom culture.